Welcome to Satsang this beautiful Thursday night in November. And I'm glad to have everybody here. Got a fun one tonight. He's kind of, last week we talked about, last one we talked about the mind. And this week the title is that the self stands beyond the mind. And for me, the takeaway, just the general takeaway on this one, and I'll launch here pretty quickly with it, but it's to see that most of the questions that we frame, right, need an answer that we're used to hearing, or it need an answer that fits with the question that we frame. And so what you're going to find in this particular one is one of the best examples that you'll see where the question is answered, but the very next question reflects that
Yeah.
answer didn't land. Right? So if you'll just follow, you'll see that, and I'll tell a little story in a while, but it's quite common uh, to watch that. Well, what that leads you to be able to do is to look at the questions you ask. So when a question arises, you can say, okay, I'm framing this question up. If the answer that arises, I probably need to stop and figure out what that answer is pointing at, because what happens is a lot of the territory that the answers are landing in or occupy aren't things that we actually hold and are used to, right? So we're actually creating a new territory of how it is that the story or the living understanding, that's what Nisargadatta and Ramesh would call what we're doing, is developing a living understanding. And so as you do that, you'll start to have a place where these things will land when a question is asked. And so you can simply do that for yourself. So, so just notice that as you go through this. That was the one thing that really, really stood out. So the questioner, he goes, as a child, I fairly often experienced states of complete happiness, verging on ecstasy. He said they ceased later. He said, but when I came to India, they reappeared, particularly after I met you. He said, yet these states, however wonderful, are not lasting. They come and go, and there is no knowing when they will come back. So he has just given us this wonderful description of the mind, um, to which Nisargadatta responds, how can anything be steady in a mind that's not steady? Right? So there's a really nice little answer. And so what is the response? The response is, how can I make my mind steady? So there's a question to take a look at. How was the question asked? It was, how can I make my mind steady? If you look at the goals of a lot of spiritual movement and paths, they're exactly to do that, right? They are exactly pointed at trying to take something that is not steady and is changeable and make it permanent, right? To make it not be what its nature is. So recognize that that's the question here. So how can an unsteady mind, this is Nisargadatta, how can an unsteady mind make itself steady? It cannot, of course. It is the nature of the mind to roam about. All you can do, and here's the answer, is shift the focus of consciousness beyond the mind. Question comes in, how is it done? Right? And now he says, refuse all thoughts except one, the thought I am. So he brings you right back to where we've always been, right? The mind will rebel in the beginning. Now, notice he's laying out the map here. The mind will rebel in the beginning, but with patience and perseverance, it will yield and keep quiet, right? Once you are quiet, things will begin to happen spontaneously and quite naturally without any interference on your part. Now, what he's saying there, which is kind of interesting, is we all know that things happen spontaneously and quite naturally without any interference on our part. So when you look at what the response is here, he's not telling you that the mind has changed, right? What he's telling you is that the revealing is that that's how things have always happened, right? When one stands apart from the mind, it can be seen that everything has always happened by itself naturally and spontaneously, right? So what is this entire thought place that we live in? What's it aimed at, right? It's aimed at having a story around the I. So earlier I said, look where your questions come from. That's where they come from, right? So his first question is, how is it done? Then he comes on and he says, can I avoid this protracted battle with my mind? Right? So bang, back to the I, right? In other words, he's asking a question from the mind, about the mind, right? So you can see he's doggedly, he's trying when he hears something, when he says shift the focus of consciousness beyond the mind, he didn't put that into his calculus in terms of how he's going to now ask how to get that done. And it makes it really difficult if that's not already in there, in a certain way. Go ahead, Michael. You're up. I
Ooh,
saw a raised hand.
yeah. Why do you think Nisargadatta equates um, the I am with that which is beyond the mind? Because, like, the way that I would experience would be, in this instance, would be the I am would be like the foundational story. Like once you get through all of the descriptions of what that I am is, at the foundation, there's a singular story called the I am. But for me, that's still the mind. It's like the first story of the mind. And then once moving outside of the mind is the witness, because the witness is what sees even the I am of the mind. So why do you think is this just a teaching mechanism where he doesn't?
Well, well, it's what we talked about earlier, which was once you're located in the I am, then the magnetism to draw you back out to exactly what you just talked about. So with this particular person, you can tell how he's asking the questions, right? He wants to give him an answer, which is in order to deal with the instability of the mind, one needs to stand outside of the mind. And so this particular person's question is, how do I do that? And I think you're absolutely right that standing in the I am for this person is going to start within the mind, as we would, but that the natural development of that stance is going to pull back until it actually does sit in the witness. So to me, that I think is how he's teaching that. And what I find really interesting, and you know, you can do this as well, is that I never have read, I've read I Am That I don't know how many times. And of course, you know, having spent time with Ramesh, you're kind of dunked in the water of all that is Nisargadatta. But I had never read these and noticed how doggedly folks, the questioners, were really hanging on to their stuff. I just had never noticed that before, right? But this particular one, if you look at it, I mean, it's almost, you know, 4 pages, right? And to the very end, you know, he's asking the questions. There's not yet a location for the answers that he's already been exposed to as he's rolling along. And so to me, what the noticing I'm having around I Am That is that, probably unlike this satsang where, you know, you've got, you know, people here who have, you know, been in satsang and are at a certain point in terms of how the holding is, the where the holding is in the I Am That, and in reading it so far, is that that there's a very beginning style, a very beginner style in the questioner, right? Because even in this thing, remember, he said in the very first paragraph, he said, they come and go. He said, he says, I came to India and they reappeared, these wonderful states that he was having, particularly after I met you. Well, that would tell me that he's been to satsangs before, right? In other words, this is not his first. He's having these wonderful experiences because he's come back and he's met Nisargadatta in India. So this is someone who's been in some that has been in some satsangs, and yet he's still very locked in. Um, I mean, one of the stories that we would see it with Ramesh every now and then, because he would talk about being lived into the moment and not being an autonomous doer, right? With that sense of I'm doing. That was what he would talk about that. And he would expose that particular concept. And almost always someone would inevitably rise and they said, well, what you're telling me is I can go get a machine gun and I can just go shoot everybody down. Right. And you couldn't help but chuckle because the exposure that this person and everybody in the room had just gotten was that nothing happened that wasn't consciousness living through them. So there literally is nothing that happens that is a product of the ego, as it were. Now, you could play the game where consciousness creates the ego to do what it does, right? But you always come back to the fact that it's going to happen. It's going to happen however that is, right? However the conditioning dictates, if you use that as kind of a chain of events. So for someone to immediate, the first thing that someone says is, no, I can be an autonomous doer. I can screw your theory up by being an autonomous doer, right? When in fact, the very thing that just was exposed was there are no autonomous doers. And that's the part of that I'm talking about, where the listening doesn't have a lot of times. There's no platform or place or field for the answer to land. And that's where I think when you look at these answers, you need to kind of stop and listen them in, because these questioners have, if you've been to several satsangs, you with Nisargadatta, you have to have likely dealt with the I am. I mean, that's one of the main features in most of what he talks about. And yet, if you watch the questions, did that answer, by the way, Michael, did that answer your question? Okay, cool. So here he goes. He goes, can I avoid a protracted battle with my mind? He says, yes, you can. Just live your life as it comes, but alertly, watchfully, allowing everything to happen as it happens, doing the natural things the natural way, suffering, rejoicing as life brings. This is also a way. He said, well, then I can marry, have children, run a business. He goes, sure. He says, you may or may not be happy. Take it in your stride. And he says, yet, the questioner, yet I want happiness. Right. So back to the here's what I want. Right. And he says, true happiness cannot be found in things that change and pass away. Pleasure and pain alternate inexorably. Happiness comes from the self, can be found in the self only. Find your real self, and all else will come with it. So again, the introduction of the real self, who's going to stand apart from this place where all of this turmoil and movement and changeability is occurring. Right. So he's still pointing out at that. So here comes the next question. If my real self is peace and love, why is it so restless? Okay. And so, of course, he says it's not your real being that is restless, but its reflection in the mind appears restless because the mind is restless, right? In essence, the mind is restless, which makes anything reflecting from it restless in terms of what we see outside of us, right? That's the projection or the reflection. It's just like a reflection of the moon in the water stirred by the wind. The wind of desire stirs the mind and the me, which is but a reflection of the self and the mind. But these ideas of movement, restlessness, pleasure, and pain are all in the mind. And here he comes. The self stands beyond the mind, aware but unconcerned. Okay, so if you look at the answers so far, right, it's been the same answer to every single question in some version. But no, it doesn't stop. It keeps going. Um, he says how to reach it. Now think about that question for a minute. right? How to reach it, right? Well, it's already there, right? So it's not about how to reach it, but it's how to reveal it, right? So that it becomes part of what is, if you will, if you want to use that phraseology. He says, you are the self here and now. That's Nisargadatta. Leave the mind alone, stand aware and unconcerned, and you will realize that to stand alert but detached, watching events come and go, is an aspect of your real nature, right? So now he's saying this place, this witnessing, is an aspect of your real nature. Or he could even say it is your real nature if he wanted to be, that he clearly could say that. So then he goes, what are the other aspects? Right. And this Argadata says, I like this kind of answer. He goes, the aspects are infinite in number. Realize one and you will realize all. So now the way I would say that, or I would go after that, would be, there's a big discussion. I don't know if you've heard these before, but there's the direct method and the indirect method, right? So dissolving concepts, right, are done. Now, normally what happens is you go into a religious world and you say, here's what troubles me. And we take that, whatever that issue is, your issue, but we take the issue and we untangle it, dissolve it, and attempt to, through some usually therapeutic process, even if it's talk therapy, we settle that one. Now, I always say that's like going to 31 flavors, right? Because there's an infinite amount of problems that this you has. And if you just line them up and give them a number, right, you settle one problem. And guess what? The you is still there with all of the problems that it's brought into play. So the next one just presents, oh, I'm number two and I'm number three, and there's an infinite amount of numbers. That's the indirect approach. So what is there that can be dissolved that, if dissolved, then would dissolve everything else that's there, right? The ticket taker, right? The you that you are. And that's called the direct method. So you will notice that most people that deal with, um, that walk into non-duality and really go, hey, wait a minute, there's a difference here between this and everything I've done before. Almost always that difference is that there's a, even if it's a intuitive recognition, right? There's an intuitive recognition that there is this infinite mouse's turnstile, if you will, of problems that are being dissolved in the normal spiritual journey, right? And that this particular one is addressing one concept. And upon that dissolution, all of the rest is handled and taken care of. And so it doesn't take a lot to realize that, hey, this in essence is a step up, if you will, or a step towards a possibility of an arrival of some kind, whatever that's going to mean in the journey that anyone is in. But there's an intuitive recognition this is different. And so that's the difference, is that the direct approach is after dissolving the one who basically owns, brings, and assembles all of the problems, right? Now expand that for a minute, right? Because if we say, hey, there's no you, right, then what is there, right? There's I am itself, right? And if I am is dissolved, then what happens? Well, all of the problems of any kind and anywhere dissolve with it, right? So that's the step through. First it's dissolving the ego and the problems that go with the ego, but we always see the ego as this limited thing, right? But actually the dissolution is as to the entirety. And that's then the awakening, the phenomenal event of awakening. Consciousness uh, basically uh, phenomenally dissolves for some body minds, right? And then we all try to understand, well, what does it take to make that happen? And of course, I don't know that anybody could say how that exactly happens. Consciousness is making that happen, right? And I guess is the best way to say it. And even that's probably a terrible way to phrase it. But nonetheless, the dissolving is as to the entirety ultimately. So you can follow with that, right? So here comes the next question. He says, realize one and you realize all. Tell me something that would help me. Right? Okay. He goes, well, you know what you need. He says, I am restless. How do I gain peace? So Nisargadatta tries a different tack. He says, well, okay, for what do you need peace? He goes, to be happy. Are you not happy now? He goes, no, I'm not. He goes, what makes you unhappy? He says, I have what I don't want and I want what I don't have. Right. So, Buddha's definition of misery, right, which is what's happening isn't what you want to have happen. That's misery. So this is a great example of that, you know. Um, I remember there's this little scene in a sitcom I watch every now and then, and somebody says, I'm unhappy today. Any idea why? And the person goes, well, whatever it was that you wanted to happen must not have happened. And he goes, oh my God, am I that transparent? I can't help but laugh whenever I hear that because it's like, no, you're not that transparent. That's kind of the same thing every single time. So, so anyway, he says, he says, so Nisargadatta, he's going to try a little different thing. He says, why don't you invert that? He says, want what you have and care not for what you don't have. Right? That gets rid of the, Buddha's misery, right? Um, And he goes and he says, well, I want what is pleasant and I don't want what is painful. Right. Now, here's a really great little run that Nisargadatta goes through around pain and pleasure. It's really one of the nicer ones you read. And he says, how do you know what is pleasant and what is not? He says, well, from past experience, I know that. He says, Nisargadatta says, oh, guided by memory. You have been pursuing the pleasant and shunning the unpleasant. Have you succeeded? Or as we might say today, how's that working out for you? Right. So there you go. He says, no, I have not. He said, the pleasant does not last. Pain sets in again. And he goes, which pain? He goes, the desire for pleasure. See, boom, immediately hooks those two up. Right. He says, and the fear of pain. He said, so the desire for pleasure is going to arrive ultimately in pain, right? Because the pleasure is going to go away, and what's left is the desire, which is painful in the face of no pleasure, right? So he says both are states of distress. Is there a state of unalloyed pleasure? Now, um, I would simply say no at the egoic level, but Nisargadatta goes a different way. He goes, every pleasure, physical or mental, needs an instrument, and both the physical and mental instruments are material, and they get tired and worn out. A lot of us can attest to that. The pleasure that they yield is necessarily limited in intensity and duration. So pain is the background of all your pleasures. You want them because you suffer, right? On the other hand, the very search for pleasure is the cause for pain. It is a vicious cycle. So I don't know if you're going to find a really kind of a better rendition, if you will, of the egoic state. I mean, that's a really great one. Go ahead, Diane.
So there was uh, on my journey, this desiring, I was told that desire was not a good thing, you
Yeah.
know. So there was the desire for the desire to go away. And then there was the desire, of course, for that desire, for the desire to go away. And when that hit me, it's like, oh, okay, that is that vicious,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
just round and round and round.
Yeah. Philosophers call that infinite regression.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time I heard that, I was just a teenager, and I was like, "Wow, that's a cool thing. Infinite regression. I like that." Anyway, so so then he goes, he goes on to say, he said, "I can see the mechanism of my confusion, but I do not see my way out of it." Well, the answer is there is, as a you, there is no way out of that, right? So he's given him the answer, and now he's kind of plumbing the egoic in order to try to, he's trying to break him through to where he sees there's a something beyond all of this, and that location is available, right? And how to arrive at that location is how I would say it. He says the very examination of the mechanism shows the way. After all, the confusion is only in your mind, which never rebelled so far against confusion and never got to grips with it. It rebelled only against pain. So he's saying, hey, the confusion is part of what comes with it. So all I can do is stay confused. Again, the answer to that is yes, but he goes, be alert, question, observe, investigate, learn all you can about confusion, how it operates, what it does to you and others. Being clear about confusion, you become clear of confusion. Right? How do you become clear of confusion? Well, when it arises, it's witnessed, right? And it falls. It rises and it falls. That ultimately is the piece. So the I that is asking these questions, all that I can do is just stay confused if it insists on continuing to try to deal with it internally. That's going to be the result, right? So he says, now this is one I love. This is another really fun piece. And when I look at myself, I find my strongest desire is to create a monument. Now, I had never understood the monument thing in the way he describes it here. Because what the monument thing ends up being is the human's intuitive understanding that there is something permanent, and it goes about trying to create that permanence by creating a monument, which is what he explains. I had never, I obviously we watch. I mean, my favorite is, the legacy of the presidents. All these presidents want a legacy, and I'm always kind of like, well, I don't know, pick a year, take 1,000, go back to the year 1000. That must have been an important year, right? 2000 was, 1000 must have been. So who was hanging around in the year 1000 and what's their legacy? And I have no effing idea, right? Well, yeah. And in the year 3000, let me tell you how the people are going to be responding to the legacies from the year 2000, the same way the people in 2000 are responding about the year 1000. So this creating of legacies appeared to me pretty quickly to be a pretty useless kind of endeavor. But nonetheless, it comes from a kind of an honest spot. It's that intuitive understanding that there is permanence and attempting through being an autonomous doer to create some permanence, right? So he says, even when I think of a home, wife, and children, it's because it is a lasting, solid testimony to myself. He says, well, right, build yourself a monument. How do you propose to do it? And he goes, it matters little what I build as long as it is permanent. Well, he says, surely you can see for yourself that nothing is permanent. So, all wears out, breaks down, dissolves. The very ground on which you build gives way. What can you build that will outlast all? He says, intellectually, verbally, I am aware that all is transient, yet somehow my heart wants permanency. Permanency. There's your intuition right there, right? And then he says, I want to create something that lasts. He said, well, then Nisargadatta, then you must build it out of something lasting. What have you that is lasting? He says, neither the body nor the mind will last. You must look elsewhere, right? Keeps pushing him out, pushing him out. He says, I long for permanency, but I find it nowhere. He says, well, aren't you yourself permanent? He said, I was born and I shall die. Right? So he comes back. He says, can you truly say that you were not before you were born? And can you possibly say when you're dead, now I am no more? He said, you cannot say from your own experience that you are not. You can only say, I am. Others too cannot tell you that you are not. Right? So he goes on to say, well, there's no I am in sleep. And of course, Nisargadatta does his normal. He says, before you make such sweeping statements, you know, examine carefully your walking state. It says walking state here, and I'm pretty sure it's waking state. You will soon no, maybe it's not. He's talking about sleeping. I don't know why you'd call it the walking state, though. Anyway, you will soon discover that it is full of gaps. That when the mind blanks out. Notice how little you remember even when you're fully awake. He says you cannot say that you were not conscious during sleep. You just don't remember. A gap in memory is not necessarily a gap in consciousness. Right? So he goes on. He says, can I make myself remember my state of deep sleep? He says, of course. He says, by eliminating the intervals of inadvertence during your waking hours, you will gradually eliminate the long interval of absent-mindedness, which you call sleep. You will be aware that you are asleep. Right? Now, I don't necessarily advise that that's something that folks, I mean, you could spend your time doing that. I'm not sure that that's going to take you anywhere if that's what you focus on, but nonetheless, clearly possible. He said, yet the problem of permanency or the continuity of being is not solved. He says, permanency is a mere idea born of the action of time. Time, again, depends on memory. By permanency, you mean unfailing memory through endless time. You want to eternalize the mind. That's not possible, right? Because remember, he keeps coming from the ego. So you have to get to that place where what are you trying to do? So here we go. Then what is eternal? So this whole conversation, we finally get the question, what is eternal? That which does not change with time. You cannot eternalize a transient thing. Only the changeless is eternal. Right? So now he's walking into that. He says, I'm familiar with the general sense of what you say. I do not crave for more knowledge. All I want is peace. He says, you can have that for the asking, all the peace you want. He says, I'm asking. He says, great. Then here's what you do. You've got to ask with an undivided heart, live an integrated life. How? Detach yourself from all that makes your mind restless. Renounce all that disturbs its peace. If you want peace, deserve it. Surely everyone deserves peace. Only those deserve it who don't disturb it. Great saying, by the way. He says, in what way do I disturb peace? By being a slave to your desires and fears, even when they are justified. And in the end, he says, emotional reactions born of ignorance or inadvertence are never justified. Seek a clear mind and a clear heart. All you need is to keep quietly alert, inquiring into the real nature of yourself. This is the only way to peace. Okay, so that is the entirety of that. But notice what happens here, how doggedly this one came back, and Nisargadatta was looking for every kind of possible angle to establish that there was a already existing awareness in which the true self stands, if you want to say it that way, and which everything else arises within it. Right? Now, will life become quiet and peaceful? Well, no, not the life that is observed, that is arising. Right? Its basic function and its basically dependence is on the activity of change. That is what consciousness is, change, in essence. That's its basic principle. All that it throws up into view right, from a witness standpoint, is going to be composed of changeable, right? It's gonna be separate, changeable, moving parts. All of that is always going to be the case. So all perception from within the body mind, right? And the body mind included, by the way, remember, it's a piece of this ever changing, right? Gets old, breaks down, the body mind does eventually give way, and it's done. Changeability. So the witness has to remember last time we talked about the Tibetan meditation, standing, putting yourself in it. So what that's doing is it's recognizing that you are change. Put yourself in with all the rest of the change. And that becomes part of what is being witnessed upon the arising. And that's what this whole thing, is about. But this is a great one, like I say, to go back and read. It was funny. I read through it 3 times just today, because I don't know why this morning when I read it first, I'd read it before, but I don't know why. I found it very entertaining. I go, man, this dude is just, he's locked, and he's not going to leave until he gets an answer to his question. And so it's very enjoyable from that particular point.
But Nisargadatta was amazingly patient and kind through the whole thing.
Well, he's known for being kind of a curmudgeon with no, kind of patience, so to speak, right? And he certainly evidenced that. But when you actually see, what he does, we'll probably take a break from I Am That here and there as we go through, and I'll pull some of the ones that Ramesh wrote in his pieces, because it's him actually writing about what he's seen, which is what this is as well. But it's being written by somebody, I think, that actually has in my mind, a clearer version. But it does reflect what you're talking about, how he painstakingly a lot of times went back and back and back and back. And this one probably reflects it as much as any I've ever seen. And that was one thing after I read today, I was like, wow, Nisargadatta really went back after this. It was like you'd read the question and you'd almost say in your head, oh, I wonder which approach he's going to use this time.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's not the answer. It's how you refine your questioning. So it's like he was trying to get him to actually refine the questioning, get what is the real question here,
Yeah.
you know.
And so if you look at it, you say the outer guru, if you will, right, is just simply a stand-in for the inner guru, right? So in the beginning, when I said, hey, listen, watch how these questions are asked, and you can now watch how you ask questions, right?
Exactly.
So what are we trying to energize? Well, the inner guru, right, will now mediate all of this, right? When there's not an external capability of going out asking a question, well, guess what we depend on, right? So what happens a lot in the seeking is that people have, masters and gurus and all of that thing, and they become dependent on that, right? And of course that gets you, gets you nowhere. The mechanics of what's happening, if they can be held internally, then the inner guru can do its work. And so that's a part of, I think, of what this particular one. And not only that, think about it. I mean, think of it, Joseph. Are you that patient with yourself?
Yeah, kind of.
You probably are by person. I know Joseph pretty well, but I'm not. Alan would be saying things like, "You dumbass," or things like that. That would be the self-talk that would be happening. That would be happening with this personality.
If I may say, Alan, you've displayed that same level of patience with me. that same level of that perseverance of coming from different angles over and over and over again. So I just wanted to share that because you displayed that
I
always.
appreciate that. Thank you.
No, I even have patience with my own not understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay, because ultimately the question is, a lot of times the way that we're attempting to understand isn't going to necessarily lead us anywhere anyway, right? It's actually, in a way, as I say, creating that living understanding, because what makes us doggedly go back and ask egoic questions over and over again? We've lived our entire life as though we're an ego, right? So that doggedly sets a place in us where we're always going to use that particular territory from which to engage around anything. Well, now what's happening, the living understanding is saying, no, there's actually a different version, an understanding that operates differently than the one that you have been practicing your entire life, right? And that living understanding now gives you access to things that, to the revealing that hadn't happened before, right? It gives you that possibility.
Yeah, my experience that I've had these moments of living understanding, and then I'm amazed that still the mind doesn't get it. And so there's these certain places I keep hitting up against. I'm cool with that. I figure someday I'll stop doing that, but I'm just amazed at the mind.
Well, I mean, that's what Nisargadatta is saying here, which is the mind will always do that.
Yeah, I know.
So which means, like when I read about the mind becoming quiet, that happens. No, absolutely no doubt about it, right? But also there is the attributes of any particular body mind, right? So when you have, kind of the ADD shot out of a cannon kind of personality, right? It's highly likely that the natural basic state of the mind and that body mind is going to be active. So when it is, you're like, okay, that's, my monkey likes to dance. If yours sits quietly in the corner, I love you dearly. I wish mine did. My monkey dances. So that's kind of how that, look at, but the beauty of it is that you don't get hooked on this thing about trying to quiet the mind. Consciousness, if the mind's going to be quiet, consciousness will handle that, right? It's the monkey grinder anyway. Just be the monkey.
Yeah.
I found a passage this week that was really helpful for me, and I felt that it kind of addressed something that I was curious about that Michael brought up last week. It's on page 274, and I think it's chapter 58. And the passage is, there's the body and there's the self. And this is what was very helpful for me.
It's on 274.
Yes, sir.
Where on the page?
It's one, two, it's at the bottom. It's where Maharaj is talking. The last time he talks on the page.
Okay, cool.
So he says, you have brought in duality where there is none. There's the body and there is the self. Between them is the mind, in which the self is reflected as I am. And that was really helpful for me understanding what I am is. It was like kind of sealed it for me when I read that somehow.
Well, no, and I think that leads right into where Michael was actually speaking, because he was in the question in tonight's, right? He's advising him to go sit in the I am, but actually that's still the active principle until it's magnetized back, right? So, and the one thing that I noticed that Nisargadatta, doesn't do is he doesn't get into the delineation of that, right? So I mean, I think that's great to see that for exactly what it is, and then understand that the happening, the magnetization of awakening is what ultimately pulls that in to what stands, beyond the I am, as it were.
Yeah, but
That's the way.
Alan, is it fair to say that the I am, sitting on the I am, is actually sitting on the concepts, desires, and stories that reveal themselves? And as you're sitting on the I am, everything gets measured up against all that is. And in that case, the magnetization to all that is reveals itself as the concepts dissolve. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's a way of kind of describing that process. Yeah,
it's
I
kind
like
of
that.
my internal experience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Is
Yeah.
you see,
Yeah.
I see concepts pop up that cause tension, and I measure them against all that is, and then the tension drops away, and then it's just a process that continues on and on until I guess it's done, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, I'm saying that's a way of describing that movement, that magnetization, if you will.
One of the processes for me was oh, I got it now. And then 2 weeks later, oh, I thought I had it, but man, now I got it. Now I understand, and until I realized I'm saying I understand,
Yep.
I've got it. I've this,
I
I've
told you
that.
I told you about me putting together the theory of everything. I don't know if I told you that story or not, but I mean, I would go home every night after Osho's discourse and take all the stuff that I had not, all the pieces that didn't fit, and I would redesign the theory. And I was up till 2 or 3 o'clock most nights. This is what I did. And when I was done, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, okay, I got it. Right. Go back the next day, he'd speak and it'd be like, oh no, I gotta drink.
I got it. I got it.
I did that. I did that for at least a couple of years. I mean, it was like, and it's such a great kind of a thing to see that there is no assembly of concepts and ideas that once assembled deliver anything. Right. But this body mind had to do 2 years of living it till 3 a.m. on a daily basis, so because there's an inherent some people learn that way, and so that was part of the learning process. But I hear you describe that. I immediately start. I said, hey, I've got this thing called the theory of everything. You want to help me put it together? That's some snake oil. Let's go. but it was a great experience. It really was.
Yeah.
Hey Tanner, which section you said that page 274? I have it online. I don't have page numbers. What section was that in?
58.
58. Okay.
And that what Tanner pointed out is really profound. It gets you couldn't find a better summary of the entire book in 2 sentences than right there.
Oh, that was a good one.
Yeah, he nailed it.
No, I really liked it because it did a really sweet job of addressing, what it is that Michael and I have been wrestling with the last few satsangs, so it was sweet to see him put it together that way.
Well, this thing likes to meditate. I mean, it's like helpful for this thing to meditate. So, I teach at I teach a meditation class at a rehab clinic once a week, and I use my background's in Kundalini yoga, so that's kind of how I got into all of this. But these people can't do Kundalini yoga at the rehab clinic because they're like right off the street. So I do a little bit something like a satsang with them, and I just get them to think about what is actually going on in your mind. You know, that's just sort of what I do with them. And one technique that I developed is I get them to just watch their thoughts and put a red dot on any thought that comes up. And it it's amazing in that it will stop your thoughts right away. Um, because you're putting a conscious intervention in there. And I was wondering, um, it sounds like Maharaj in his tradition that they would also use a mantra. Um, but it doesn't seem like he was giving them to people, but it seems like he was being given a mantra by his guru. Is that right?
Yeah, he and it was the same with the you know the Rajas where they sing and all of that as well. You know, Ramesh's mom loved that, so he would do that at the end of every satsang. So and there's a couple of places where he talks about that the mantras were as this one likes to meditate. Well, you know, Nisargadatta grew up in a world where mantras were in use for most of his development, and so it was something he enjoyed.
Right.
But he would readily explain that it had no particular um, use when it came to this particular path.
Mm.
Now to me, having been in the meditative path is kind of in the beginning, and then moving over into the Advaitic world. I always saw meditation as a device to establish the space where witnessing could arise, right? And I would always say that what it was that life was a function of volume and velocity, and that the way that we uptake in the body mind and the way the mind uptakes things when the velocity and volume are high, that they're done with little awareness
Mm-hmm.
or no awareness, right? And so what that device did was it reduced the volume and velocity to a place where awareness became a possibility. And that's how I always looked at meditation. So so it's no surprise to me. And I mean, I just share that because if you like meditation, as I said, that was the path I came out of before I ran into this, I mean, the way I ran into it was hilarious. We're up in Pune, we're up in Pune, India, and someone said, "Hey, Ramesh is down in Mumbai, with Nisargadatta. You can go there every day and see him." So we all got on a train, went down and saw him. That's how it was, just that kind of a happenstance thing. And a lot of and Osho by then was out of the body, so a lot of us ended up really really taking advantage of that. We'd go down and stay for weeks in hotels, and all of that kind of thing. But the connection between what already is installed there in terms of this meditation, I think understood that it has the perfect coupling with what we're up to here. And I just wanted to, because that's how this one likes to meditate as well, surprisingly, but that's true.
I have to agree because I did TM for a long time.
Oh yeah, well, you probably, yeah.
And when I found Advaita, it was funny because I was taking some courses there called Body Talk from the founder John Veltheim,
Yeah.
who's an Australian guy, and I sat in his classes, and I think the second or third course that I took with him, I was there mostly in tears. I mean, it was like everything he was saying was that arrow to the heart kind of thing. And he pulled me aside at the end of the course and he said, "You need to meet my wife. You need to," and she's the one who was the student of Ramesh.
Ramesh. Yeah, yeah.
And and it's like he said, this is not where you belong.
Yeah.
Although you can keep taking my courses, don't get me wrong,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I'll take the
but-
money.
but you need to meet Esther.
Yeah,
And that's, you know, when I was
awesome.
introduced to that, and I, you know, TM just kind of fell away.
Yeah.
And I was 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, every day. It was, you know, and I loved it. I truly did. And it didn't matter where I was. I could do it in the middle of a crowd. But I, you know, it fell away. I just don't, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to me, what was sweet was just the connection between the two.